All right, good people. So we're gonna slow this down, make it a little real, more practical, and transition over to Q&A. I think I got everything pulled up because I know what happens when we talk about systems and culture. People always nod, but then they leave with questions that they didn't say out loud. So I'm gonna answer a few of the questions that I know are already sitting with you. Excuse me, but I'm also gonna answer some in the chat. How do I know when something is actually systemic versus personality conflict? So this is actually a good question because the simplest way to think about it is if, let's see, if it happened once, then it might be personality. But if it happens repeatedly across time, roles, or even demographics, then that is culture, right? Patterns typically are the giveaway. So if multiple people have similar experiences, or if turnover clusters around the same identities, or if certain voices get labeled the same way consistently, then that's not random at all. That is the system by design, even if it wasn't intentional design, right? So personality conflict is usually isolated and inconsistent, but systematic issues feel very predictable. And you can almost guess who's going to struggle before it even happens. That is usually culture, right? So once we start like naming patterns, the next thing that shows up is discomfort. So what's the difference between discomfort and being attacked? Discomfort actually feels like tension in your body. Being attacked feels like your dignity or your character is being threatened. So if we're thinking about discomfort, right? Discomfort says this is hard to hear. Attack says you are being dehumanized. And a lot of times, especially in white spaces, discomfort gets mislabeled as an attack. So I'm not saying that to take that lightly, right? I'm saying this actually very carefully. Most times when these conversations show up, it is actually white folks navigating discomfort. Not always, but most times. And because white folks have historically had the option to avoid racial discomfort, that's why it happens. So when this happens and when this shows up, it feels super intense. But just because it's intense doesn't mean that it's harm. Growth typically always starts with discomfort. And if we treat discomfort like violence, we will actually never grow. I actually want to flip that on the other side because I hear people say systemic and think that we're removing personality, but we're not. So a question says, can't focusing on systems remove personal responsibility? No, actually. It depends. I would say it depends on the person, but I actually think it deepens responsibility. Systems are made up of people, and if we only focus on individuals and we fire one person, we think we solved it. But if we focus on the system, we ask, okay, what incentives are in place, what norms are rewarded, what behaviors are overlooked, and personal accountability without structural exam is actually incomplete. Structural accountability without personal responsibility is also just hollow, and we need both. Why does this conversation feel like it's targeting white people? Great question. And let me say this very plainly. Most of the time, when we're talking about white supremacy culture patterns, we're talking about norms that were shaped in white dominant spaces or environments. So that is why it feels like white folks are the ones navigating the tension most of the times in these conversations. That does not mean, though, that every white person is bad. That does not mean that every white person is intentionally causing harm, or that people of color don't internalize these same patterns. We all swim in the same water, for a terrible analogy, I guess. The difference is proximity to power. When you have historically been centered, critique can feel like being targeted, but critique is not being condemned. It's actually an invitation. So the nuance is white supremacy culture isn't about just white hoods, right? It's about habits, and habits can actually be unlearned. I need you to connect that to actually another question that people typically ask, which is why do black folks sometimes seem frustrated even when white folks are trying? And the answer is because trying isn't the same thing as shifting or growing or moving. If you've been explaining something for over 10 years, or let's just say 40, 50 years, and you've seen reports written and ignored, or you've watched urgency go up only when white folks are uncomfortable, you get tired. So that's why we talk about fatigue a ton. Frustration often comes through repetition. It's not always about this moment. It's about what the accumulated experience has been. And so when someone's frustrated, instead of saying, why are they so angry? You should ask, how long have they been carrying this? That question alone actually shifts the room. How do you stay in the conversation? How do I stay in the conversation when I feel defensive? That's actually a great question. First, you should notice your defensiveness. Just notice it. Don't judge it. Don't try to get rid of it. Just notice it. Defensiveness usually means something important to your identity feels threatened. So instead of reacting, you should ask yourself, am I protecting my character or my comfort? And then take some deep breaths. Then ask a question instead of making a statement. Curiosity can disrupt defensiveness a lot. And remember, feeling defensive doesn't make you bad, but acting from defensiveness will shut things down. What if I'm scared of saying the wrong thing? Guess what? You probably will. We all do. The goal is not perfection. I think that's the issue that people also keep trying to focus on. The goal is actually repair. Say what you understand today. Be open to correction tomorrow. And when you get it wrong, because you probably will, don't collapse. Apologize, learn, be intentional, and keep moving. When you're silent, that's what protects comfort. Imperfection engagement is actually a way to build capacity. Okay, here's a workplace question. How do I respond when someone says we're already doing diversity work? First, let's affirm the effort and the energy. We can say something like, yes, we have initiatives, and then ask what measurable shifts have happened because of them. Not activity, not impact, but has retention changed? Are people staying longer? Are we hiring more people? Has leadership diversified? Do people report higher psychological safety? Because if we're doing work and changing the culture, that's not the same. Sometimes we're already doing the work, but that's a shield against some deeper evaluation. And if you're a good leader, you should be able to move from activity to outcomes. Usually when we're talking about accountability, if people ask the question, like, how do we hold people accountable without shaming them? And this is a good one. So accountability names behavior. Shame will attack identity. Accountability usually says, like, this action caused harm. And shame says you are the harm. So I need you to focus on impact. Be very specific. Clarify what your expectations are and offer a path to move forward. And be consistent. If accountability only shows up when marginalized folks speak up, it's going to feel reactive. And if it's backed into culture, though, it feels like it's developmental. All right, I got a few more questions. What does interrupting comfort look like in a meeting? It looks like when somebody says something tense or the room gets super tight and tough, you say, hey, let's stay here for a minute. Or that feels like it's important. Can we unpack that? When you interrupt discomfort, it doesn't always mean you got to escalate it and move into conflict. But it could mean that you're resisting the urge to smooth it over too quickly or move past it. When you're in comfort or operating out of comfort, you want to move on. But when you're growing and building competency, you want to dig in. So hopefully that's helpful. If we're people of faith, isn't grace enough? Listen, I actually appreciate this. Grace is actually very essential. But grace without truth is just sentiment, right? In a lot of faith traditions, repentance requires confession, and confession requires naming the thing, being very specific about what happened. That means you got to be honest about what the impact was And so I would hope to believe that grace doesn't include avoidance, right? Grace is what actually makes accountability survivable. I hope that grace is not the only thing that we go off of, but maybe the confession is more important than grace. How do we balance compassion with accountability? Compassion understands context. So when we're thinking about ability, though, that usually just names consequence. So you could say, I understand how you got here, and still say, this still can't continue. If you're a mature leader, you should be able to hold both. And if we lean only into compassion, then we'll just keep repeating harm. But if we lean only into accountability, then we'll keep growing fear. So I'm hoping that we recognize that balance is capacity. And if we do those together, then we hopefully get to the end goal. All right, last question. Why does progress feel like it moves forward and then it snaps back? Because the system really dislikes or even likes to resist disruption. When change is threatening what stability looks like, usually backlash follows. Progress isn't always linear. We know that. It's very cyclical. And here's the part that people won't tell you. When urgency fades away, comfort will show itself all over again, which is why building capacity and just capacity in general, it matters more than just the momentum that we're carrying. Momentum will keep spiking, but capacity always sustains us. So if you were still here, that tells me something. That means that you're not looking for surface level answers. If you're still here, that means it's not anything about being perfect, but it's really about just growing the muscle to stay in the conversations that actually matter. And again, if you and your team want to go deeper, like whether it's the assessment, coaching, or just having a conversation, I encourage you to reach out. I would love to help you build some capacity intentionally, because that's the only way the systems change. Appreciate you sticking around for the Q&A. Talk to you soon.